John hated the stench of desperation. It clung to places like this, bazaars on the fringes of civilization, where the law was more of a suggestion than a rule. The market was a mess of flickering neon signs, black market vendors, and shadows that moved too much to be ignored. Yet here he was, walking through it all, knowing damn well he didn't belong. His boots scuffed against the dusty floor as he scanned the stalls. It wasn't the tech or alien trinkets that had brought him here. It was the whispers he'd overheard in a backwater cantina. Exotic goods, the drunk trader had slurred. Slaves, fighters, hybrids. If you've got the credits, they've got what you want. John didn't know what he wanted, at least, not exactly. Not until he'd heard the word Amazon, a relic term from Earth's mythology. It was now used to describe genetically engineered warriors. Super soldiers bred for war, trained to kill, and feared across the galaxy. Most of them served corporations or militarized regimes. Some, however, had gone rogue. He wasn't looking for trouble, but something had drawn him here. Something more than curiosity. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the memory of a war he'd walked away from years ago. A war where he'd watched people turned into tools, broken and discarded when they'd outlived their usefulness. He couldn't shake the feeling that this auction was the same rot in a different package. The crowd thickened as he approached the main platform. He kept his hood low, his face hidden. Eyes followed him anyway, sizing him up. He was no mercenary or corporate bigwig, and it showed. But his anonymity wasn't the only thing protecting him. It was the unspoken rule of places like this. Don't start a fight unless you're ready to die in one. A wiry auctioneer stood on the stage, pacing like a showman ready to dazzle his audience. His voice boomed through crackling speakers. Ladies and gentlemen, the finest specimens the galaxy has to offer. Fighters, guards, companions, whatever your heart desires. John's stomach tightened as he watched the first lot dragged onto the stage, a hulking figure with gray skin and cybernetic limbs. The creature snarled, and the crowd murmured in approval. This one's been through 6 campaigns and survived. Starting bid, 50,000 credits. The bidding began immediately. John's mind wandered, his thoughts tangled in questions he couldn't answer. What was he really doing here? Was it just curiosity, or was he looking for some way to make amends for a past he couldn't forget? The auctioneer's voice snapped him back to the moment. And now, the jewel of our collection. Lot 72. 2 guards dragged the next figure forward. John froze. She was tall, easily 6.5 feet, but her most striking feature was her skin. It shimmered in shades of deep sapphire, the glow of the stage lights reflecting off it like water at twilight. Her hair, black with streaks of silver, cascaded down her back in wild waves. Her eyes, however, were what held him. They burned with defiance, a sharp contrast to the heavy restraints binding her wrists and ankles. She growled low, a sound that sent a ripple of unease through the crowd. Untamed, unbroken, the auctioneer crowed. A true Amazon, genetically perfected for combat. Stronger, faster, and smarter than any soldier you'll find. And look at her. She's a masterpiece. John's gaze locked with hers for a split second. It wasn't fear he saw in her expression. It wasn't even anger. It was something deeper, sharper, like she was dissecting him with her stare. The auctioneer's voice dripped with enthusiasm. Starting bid, 100,000 credits. John didn't plan to raise his hand. He told himself he wouldn't. Yet as the bidding began, he felt his resolve slipping. 120, 150, 200. The numbers climbed higher, and John clenched his fists, fighting the inexplicable urge to join in. He didn't need a genetically engineered warrior. Hell, he couldn't even afford one. 250,000, a voice bellowed, deep and authoritative. The crowd parted slightly, revealing a towering man dressed in military-grade armor. His insignias marked him as corporate security, the kind that didn't take no for an answer. The auctioneer grinned, clearly pleased with the new bidder. Do we have 300? John's heart raced. He told himself to walk away. Let someone else deal with this mess. But then he glanced back at her. The Amazon, the one they called Lot 72. Her expression hadn't changed, but her gaze lingered on him, sharp and assessing. It was as if she were daring him, testing him. 300,000. John's voice cut through the crowd before he could stop himself. The armored man turned, his eyes narrowing as he sized John up. A murmur spread through the audience. 350, the man barked. John's palms were slick with sweat. He didn't have that kind of money, not even close. But the thought of leaving her here, sold to someone who saw her as nothing more than a weapon, made his stomach churn. 400,000, John shouted. Silence fell over the bazaar. The armored man's expression darkened, but he didn't bid again. The auctioneer's grin widened. Going once, going twice. Sold to the gentleman with exquisite taste. The crowd erupted in whispers and laughter, but John barely heard them. His heart hammered as the guards led her off the stage, struggling against her restraints. What have I done? He muttered under his breath. When the guards delivered her to his ship, she didn't go quietly. She snarled, her movements controlled but filled with raw power. Up close, her blue skin shimmered like living sapphire, and her silver-streaked hair framed a face both beautiful and terrifying. She turned her sharp gaze on John, her voice low and guttural. Why? It wasn't gratitude. It wasn't curiosity. It was a challenge. John hesitated, unsure how to answer. Finally, he said, because no one else should own you. Her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. It felt more like a warning. As the ship's doors sealed behind them, John realized he had no plan, no credits left, and no idea how to handle the feral Amazon now standing in his cargo hold. All he knew was that his life had just veered wildly off course, and he wasn't sure if it would ever find the right path again. The hum of the freighter's engines filled the silence as John leaned against the control panel, trying to catch his breath. The woman, Lot 72, though he couldn't bring himself to call her that, sat in the farthest corner of the cargo hold, her shackles still locked tight. She hadn't spoken again since that single, cutting why. John glanced at her, uncertain whether the quiet was a blessing or a warning. Her piercing gaze tracked his every move, unblinking and sharp like a predator sizing up prey. Her blue skin shimmered faintly under the dim lights, giving her an ethereal quality that made her seem more myth than reality. He took a cautious step forward, holding out a sealed meal packet. You hungry? She didn't answer, but the slight tension in her posture told him she understood. He placed the packet on the floor and backed away. Her eyes flicked to the food. Slowly, she moved, the chain on her restraints scraping against the floor. She tore open the packet with a feral efficiency, sniffing its contents before devouring it in a few quick bites. John tried not to stare, but couldn't help noticing the precision in her movements. Nothing wasted. Every motion purposeful. I'm John, he said, keeping his tone calm. You have a name? She didn't respond. Okay, he muttered. Silent treatment it is. He turned back to the control panel, his fingers tapping absent patterns as he tried to think. What was he supposed to do now? The auctioneer hadn't offered a manual for what to do with a furious, genetically engineered warrior. The sudden clatter of metal jolted him. He whipped around to see her standing, the shackles that had been around her wrists lying broken on the floor. Damn it, John muttered, reaching instinctively for the plasma baton clipped to his belt. He stopped himself. A weapon wouldn't help. I'm not your enemy, he said, his voice steady despite the hammering in his chest. She stepped closer, her movements fluid and deliberate. Even without the shackles, her ankle restraints forced her to shuffle, but it didn't diminish the menace in her approach. You bought me, she said, her voice low and rough, as though in used to speech. I didn't want to, John replied honestly, but leaving you there didn't seem right. Her brow furrowed, a flicker of confusion crossing her face. Right? Look, I don't know how you ended up there, he continued, choosing his words carefully. But I'm not going to treat you like property. You can go wherever you want once we figure this out. Her head tilted, the faintest trace of skepticism in her expression. Go. Yes, go, John repeated. As in free. No chains, no collars, no one owning you. She didn't respond immediately. Instead, she lowered herself back into the corner, her gaze never leaving his. John exhaled slowly and sat down on a crate across from her. I didn't exactly plan this, he admitted. I just couldn't leave you there. That place, those people, it's not right. Not right, she echoed, the words carrying an unfamiliar weight. Yeah, he said. Not right. The silence stretched between them, but it felt different this time. Not quite comfortable, but less hostile. He studied her for a moment. Her features, though alien, were striking. High cheekbones, sharp jawline, and those luminous, golden eyes that seemed to pierce straight through him. She looked like someone who had seen too much, endured too much. Do you remember how you got there? John asked. Her gaze hardened, and for a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. But then she spoke, her voice clipped and distant. Captured. By who? Raiders, she said, the word like venom on her tongue. John nodded. He'd dealt with raiders before, scavengers who preyed on colonies and small ships, kidnapping or killing as they pleased. The idea of her, someone clearly capable of taking on 10 raiders at once, being captured didn't add up. Did they ambush you? He pressed. Her eyes narrowed. No. Betrayed. John frowned. By your own people? She didn't answer, but the tightening of her jaw spoke volumes. Sounds like we've got something in common, John said quietly. She raised an eyebrow, the first hint of curiosity breaking through her guarded exterior. I've been betrayed too, he admitted, leaning back against the crate. By people I trusted. It's why I'm out here, in this tin can, scraping by. She studied him, her expression unreadable. Finally, she asked, why help me? John hesitated. The truth was he didn't entirely know. Was it guilt? A sense of justice? Or something deeper? Something he wasn't ready to face? I guess I just don't like seeing people in chains, he said. Her eyes softened slightly, though her posture remained tense. John, she said, as though testing the name. Yeah, he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. And you are? For a moment, he thought she wouldn't answer. Then she straightened, a trace of pride returning to her voice. Kyra. John nodded. Kyra, it's good to meet you. She didn't return the sentiment, but the faintest flicker of something, respect, maybe, crossed her face. John rose to his feet, stretching out the tension in his shoulders. Get some rest, he said. I'll figure out what we're doing next. Kyra watched him go, her gaze lingering long after he disappeared down the corridor. She didn't trust him, not yet, but for the first time since her capture, she felt a glimmer of something she couldn't quite name. Hope. The ship drifted in the vastness of space, its engines humming a low, steady tune. John stared out of the cockpit's viewport, his mind as restless as the stars seemed distant. For all its silence, the freighter felt crowded now, its vast cargo hold suddenly alive with an energy he hadn't planned for. He found himself thinking of Kyra again, her fierce presence seared into his thoughts. She wasn't like anyone or anything he'd encountered. The image of her dismantling those supposedly indestructible restraints played in his head on a loop, a reminder of how precarious his position was. After a few minutes of aimless contemplation, John stood, his boots thudding softly against the metallic floor as he made his way toward the hold. If he was going to make this work, whatever this was, they needed to find some common ground. The door slid open with a mechanical hiss, and there she was sitting cross-legged in the center of the hold. Kyra had claimed a small section of the space, though she didn't seem interested in making herself comfortable. The fractured remains of the cuffs lay scattered around her, and she appeared to be examining one piece, her fingers turning it over with precision. Her posture was deceptively relaxed, but John knew better. Even in stillness, Kyra radiated tension, like a spring coiled too tightly. You've got a knack for breaking things, John said, leaning against the doorframe. Kyra glanced up, her golden eyes flickering with faint amusement before narrowing into suspicion. It was weak, she replied simply, her voice steady but sharp, like the edge of a blade. John stepped closer, holding up his hands in mock surrender. Weak? That alloy's supposed to hold cargo containers during turbulence. Then your containers must break often, Kyra said, setting the metal down with a clink. John chuckled despite himself. Fair point. He lowered himself to the floor a few feet away, careful to keep the distance non-threatening, but not so far as to seem fearful. I've been thinking, he said, trying to sound casual, about names. Kyra tilted her head, her expression unreadable. I mean, Lot 72 doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, he continued. Kyra suits you better. She studied him in silence, her gaze as sharp as ever. Finally, she said, "It's mine. I chose it." John raised an eyebrow. "You chose it? I thought it was given to you." "It was," she said, her voice quieter now, though no less resolute. "But it's still mine." The words hung in the air, and John nodded slowly. He didn't press further. Instead, he shifted gears, hoping to chip away at the walls she kept so firmly in place. "What does it mean?" he asked, genuinely curious. Kyra's golden eyes softened just slightly. "Strength," she said after a pause. "Not the kind you can see, the kind you have to feel." John felt a twinge of respect rise in his chest. "It fits," he said. "Does it?" Kyra's tone carried a faint edge of challenge. "Yeah," John replied. "You've got it in spades, whether you believe it or not." Kyra's lips twitched into what might have been the beginning of a smile, but it vanished before it could fully form. She shifted her focus to him, her gaze unrelenting. "And you?" "John, what does it mean?" Caught off guard, John let out a short laugh. "I think it just means guy from Earth." Not exactly inspiring. Kyra raised an eyebrow. "Names mean more than their words. They carry weight. Purpose." John scratched the back of his neck, suddenly feeling exposed. "Well, if mine has a purpose, I haven't figured it out yet." "Strange," Kyra said, leaning back slightly. "You don't seem to know who you are." Her words hit harder than John expected. He opened his mouth to argue, but stopped. She wasn't wrong. He didn't know what he was doing, why he was here, or what the hell he was supposed to do next. He deflected. "All right then, why don't you tell me who you are? You mentioned raiders. What happened?" Kyra's gaze darkened, her body tensing like a storm gathering on the horizon. For a moment, John thought she might shut him out completely. Then, slowly, she began to speak. "I fought for them," she said, her voice low but steady. "Not the raiders. My people. I led them, protected them, gave them everything I had. And when the time came, they gave me away." John frowned. "Why?" "They wanted power," Kyra said, her tone sharp with disdain. "And when I refused to be their weapon, they decided I was a liability." The weight of her words pressed down on the room. John could see the pain she worked so hard to bury, the betrayal that had cut her deeper than any wound ever could. "Sounds like you got the short end of the stick," John said quietly. Kyra's eyes snapped to his, fierce and unyielding. "It's not over," she said, her voice carrying an edge of defiance. "I will make them pay for what they've done." John leaned back, considering her words. "Revenge?" he asked. "Justice," she corrected. There was no hesitation in her voice, no room for doubt. She wasn't just surviving, she was planning. John nodded. "All right, justice. I get it." Kyra studied him, her expression softening slightly. "And you? Why did you buy me?" John hesitated, unsure of how to answer. "I told you. I couldn't leave you there." "Why?" The question hit him like a hammer, blunt and unrelenting. He didn't know how to explain the strange pull he'd felt at the auction, the inexplicable urge to save her. "I guess I've seen too many people chained up, treated like things," he said finally. "I couldn't let it happen again." Kyra's gaze lingered on him, searching for something. Whatever she found, it seemed to satisfy her, because she nodded. "Then you're not as lost as you think," she said. John blinked, caught off guard by the unexpected compliment. Or was it a challenge? Kyra stood, her movements fluid and purposeful. She turned toward the door, her posture as commanding as ever. "Where are you going?" John asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "To see what kind of ship I'm on," she replied without looking back. John watched her go, a strange mix of admiration and trepidation swirling in his chest. Kyra was unlike anyone he'd ever met, strong, enigmatic, and utterly unpredictable. For the first time in years, John felt a flicker of something he'd almost forgotten. It wasn't peace or even hope. It was purpose, and he had no idea where it would take him. The freighter's lights flickered faintly, a symptom of its age and constant patchwork repairs. John leaned over the console in the cockpit, his brow furrowed as he studied the star map. His fingers traced a path to the nearest unregulated station, hoping they could lay low and restock. Behind him, he could hear Kyra's soft footsteps as she entered, her movements silent but impossible for him to ignore. "You've been pacing," John said, not looking up from the display. Kyra's voice was calm but sharp, like a blade's edge. "I don't like feeling cornered." John turned, meeting her piercing golden eyes. She stood in the doorway, her arms crossed, her posture tense but not aggressive. The faint shimmer of her blue skin caught the light, making her seem almost otherworldly. "We're not cornered," John said. "We're in deep space. Hard to feel boxed in out here." Kyra raised an eyebrow. "Not when someone's chasing you." John sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We don't even know if they're after us. Could just be some pirates looking for an easy score." Her gaze didn't waver. "You don't believe that?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "No, I don't. But I don't have enough information to know what we're dealing with. So until we do, let's not assume we're doomed." Kyra stepped further into the cockpit, the tension in her shoulders easing slightly. "You've fought before," she said, her tone less accusatory now. "Yeah, I've fought," John admitted. "But not like you. Not up close." Her lips quirked in a faint smile, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "No one fights like me." The ship jolted suddenly, and an alarm blared. John spun back to the console, his fingers flying over the controls. "What the hell?" Kyra leaned over his shoulder, her presence close enough that he could feel her warmth. "Incoming," she said, her voice steady. "I can see that," John muttered, his tone tight as he adjusted the ship's trajectory. The radar displayed a small, fast-moving craft heading straight for them. "They're locking on," Kyra said. John cursed under his breath. "They've got to grapple. If they latch on." "They won't," Kyra interrupted, her voice cold and firm. John glanced at her. "You sound awfully confident." "I've dealt with worse," she said simply. Before he could respond, the ship jolted again, harder this time. The proximity alarm wailed as the pursuing craft latched onto the freighter's hull. John slammed a fist on the console. "Damn it, they're boarding." Kyra straightened, her golden eyes narrowing. "Open the hatch." "What? Are you crazy?" She turned to him, her gaze as steady as her voice. "Open it. I'll handle them." John hesitated, his instincts warring with the sheer audacity of her request. But something in her expression, the calm confidence, the absolute certainty, convinced him. "This is insane," he muttered, keying the controls to depressurize the airlock. Kyra moved to the hatch, her posture loose but ready. When the doors slid open, 3 figures in armored suits rushed in, their weapons raised. The first didn't even see her move. 1 second he was stepping forward, and the next, Kyra's fist connected with his chest. The force of the blow sent him sprawling back into the bulkhead, his weapon clattering to the floor. The second attacker raised their rifle, but Kyra was faster. She spun, grabbing the barrel and twisting it sharply, disarming them with a single, fluid motion. She swung the weapon like a club, knocking the second figure unconscious with a single strike. The third hesitated, their weapon trembling in their hands. Kyra turned to them, her expression icy. "Leave," she said, her voice a dangerous whisper. They didn't need to be told twice. The last attacker bolted, scrambling back to their craft. Kyra stood in the now empty airlock, her chest rising and falling with controlled breaths. She tossed the rifle onto the floor, the sound echoing in the silence. John stepped forward cautiously, his eyes wide. "Remind me never to piss you off." Kyra smirked, a faint flicker of amusement breaking through her stoicism. "Smart man." John gestured to the unconscious attackers. "What do we do with them?" "Dump them," Kyra said flatly. John stared at her. "You're serious?" "They'll live," she said, her tone indifferent. John exhaled slowly. "All right, but you're helping me haul them to the airlock." Kyra nodded and stepped closer, her movements smooth and purposeful. As they worked, John couldn't help but glance at her out of the corner of his eye. She was striking, not just in her appearance, but in the way she carried herself. every action efficient and deliberate. When the attackers were finally dealt with, John leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. You know, he said, his tone lighter now, for someone who says she's not a weapon, you're pretty damn good at acting like one. Kyra turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she stepped closer, her voice softer than he expected. There's a difference between being a weapon and knowing how to fight. John nodded, her words sinking in. Fair enough. As she stood there, the tension in the room shifted. The intensity that had defined their interactions so far gave way to something subtler, something unspoken. Thank you, John said quietly. Kyra raised an eyebrow. For what? For saving my ass, he said with a faint smile. She smirked, her gaze lingering on him. Try not to need saving so often. John chuckled, the sound easing some of the weight in the air. I'll work on it. For the first time, Kyra let out a small laugh, soft but genuine. It caught John off guard, and he found himself smiling without meaning to. Come on, she said, turning toward the cockpit. Let's figure out who's really after us. As John followed her, he couldn't shake the feeling that, despite the danger, he was exactly where he needed to be. The freighter's cockpit was steeped in the soft glow of its control panels, casting faint shadows across the cramped space. John leaned over the console, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm against the metal as he tried to make sense of the situation. The attackers hadn't left much to go on. No insignias, no comm chatter, and no identifying marks on their equipment. Kyra sat across from him, her long legs stretched out and her posture deceptively relaxed. She turned the discarded rifle over in her hands, inspecting it with a critical eye. Custom made, she said, her voice cutting through the silence. Not standard issue. Someone paid a lot for this. John frowned. So not random raiders? No, she said, setting the weapon aside. This was planned. He let out a slow breath, running a hand through his hair. Planned for you or me? Kyra's golden eyes flicked to him, assessing. Does it matter? John shrugged. It does if we're both in trouble for different reasons. I've pissed off my share of people, but no one with this kind of reach. Kyra didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached for the holoscreen, pulling up a map of nearby systems. Whoever they are, they won't stop with one failed attempt. We need to figure out what they want before they find us again. John nodded, his gaze lingering on her. You always this calm under pressure? Kyra smirked faintly, the expression making her look less like a warrior and more like someone who might have once known peace. I've had practice. Before John could reply, the comm system crackled to life. A voice, cold and mechanical, filled the cockpit. Freighter X-47, this is a courtesy warning. Surrender the cargo you acquired at the Euroni's Bazaar, and no harm will come to you. John's stomach tightened. He exchanged a glance with Kyra, who had already risen from her seat, her body taut with tension. They're tracking us, she said, her voice low. John keyed the comms. And if I don't surrender? Then your ship becomes debris, the voice replied, unfeeling. Good to know, John muttered, cutting the connection. He turned to Kyra. Any chance you have a brilliant idea? Her lips pressed into a thin line. How far are we from the nearest jump point? Too far to outrun them, John said, scanning the readouts. The incoming ship was closing fast. Kyra stepped closer, her presence steadying. Then we don't run. We fight. With what? Harsh language. She ignored the sarcasm, her gaze sharp. If they want me, let them think they're getting what they came for. John stared at her. What are you suggesting? A trap, she said, her tone decisive. They think I'm cargo. Use that. John hesitated, his mind racing. If this goes wrong. It won't, she said, cutting him off. You trust me or not? John met her eyes, the intensity in her gaze unwavering. He exhaled and nodded. All right, let's do this. Minutes later, Kyra stood in the cargo hold, her wrists bound loosely with the same cuffs she had broken earlier. She wore them without complaint, her posture straight and her expression calm. You're too convincing, John said as he adjusted the controls for the external hatch. Kyra arched an eyebrow. You mean I look like a prisoner? Exactly. John said, his tone lighter than he felt. Try not to kill me when this is over. Her lips curved in a faint smirk. No promises. The pursuing ship docked with a hollow clang, and the airlock hissed as it pressurized. John stood at the control panel, his heart pounding in his chest. He glanced at Kyra one last time. Ready. She gave a single nod. The outer door slid open, revealing 3 figures in sleek black armor. Unlike the previous attackers, these moved with precision and purpose. The one in the center stepped forward, his helmet reflecting the dim light of the hold. Captain John Ryan, the figure said, his voice cold and clinical. You've made things more difficult than they needed to be. John crossed his arms, forcing a smirk. Story of my life. You must be here for her. The figure nodded toward Kyra. That's correct. Hand her over, and this ends peacefully. Peacefully for who? John asked. For you, the man replied. John pretended to consider, then shrugged. All right, she's all yours. He stepped aside, gesturing toward Kyra. The armored man approached her, flanked by his 2 subordinates. Kyra kept her head lowered, her body language subdued. John's fingers hovered over the hidden control on his belt. The leader reached for Kyra's arm, and in an instant, she moved. The cuffs snapped apart with a sharp metallic clang as she drove her elbow into his chest, sending him staggering backward. Before the others could react, she spun, disarming one with a swift kick and slamming the other into the wall with brutal efficiency. John hit the control, and the freighter's artificial gravity fluctuated. The attackers stumbled, struggling to regain their footing as Kyra moved through them like a force of nature. The leader recovered, pulling a weapon from his belt. Enough, he barked, leveling it at Kyra. John didn't think. He lunged forward, slamming into the man and knocking the weapon from his hand. The 2 crashed to the floor, grappling for control. Kyra didn't hesitate. She grabbed the leader by the collar, hauling him to his feet and slamming him against the bulkhead. Who sent you? She demanded, her voice ice cold. The man coughed, his helmet askew. You know who, he rasped. Her eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition crossing her face. She tightened her grip. Say it. He sneered. The Syndicate. They want their property back. Kyra's jaw tightened, her grip crushing the armor at his throat. For a moment, John thought she might kill him, but she released him suddenly, letting him crumple to the floor. Go, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Tell them I'm coming for them. The man scrambled to his feet, grabbing his unconscious subordinates and retreating to their ship. The hatch sealed behind them, and moments later, the pursuing craft disengaged, vanishing into the void. John turned to Kyra, his breathing heavy. The Syndicate? Kyra's expression was unreadable. They're the ones who betrayed me. John exhaled slowly, the weight of her words sinking in. This isn't just about survival, is it? No, she said, her voice steady. It's about justice. John nodded, a grim determination settling over him. Then let's make a plan. Kyra met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw something more than defiance in her eyes. He saw trust. Together, she said. John smiled faintly. Together. The freighter floated in the quiet darkness of uncharted space, its engines idling as John and Kyra stood in the dimly lit cargo hold. The Syndicate's name lingered between them, an unspoken weight pressing down like a storm waiting to break. Kyra leaned against a stack of crates, her golden eyes distant. She had been silent since their pursuers fled, lost in thought as if retracing a path only she could see. Her normally unshakable demeanor now carried a shadow of uncertainty. John broke the silence first. So, what's the plan? Kyra's gaze snapped to him, sharp and assessing. The Syndicate controls half the galaxy's black market, she said. They'll hunt me until one of us is dead. Then let's make sure it's them, John said, his tone firm. Her lips twitched, almost forming a smile. You're more reckless than I thought. John shrugged. If I were careful, I wouldn't be here. What do they want with you anyway? You're not exactly the type to follow orders. Kyra straightened, the tension in her posture returning. I wasn't supposed to follow orders. I was supposed to lead. They designed me to be their enforcer, their weapon of fear. When I refused, they decided I wasn't useful alive. John frowned. So they sold you out? They tried to destroy me, Kyra said, her voice hardening. When that didn't work, they turned me into a commodity. John shook his head. That's a hell of a way to treat someone they created. They don't see me as someone, she replied coldly. I'm an asset. Nothing more. John stepped closer, his voice softening. That's not true. Whatever they think, it doesn't define you. Her gaze softened slightly, but she quickly looked away. Words don't change reality, John. No, he agreed, but actions do. So let's act. Kyra studied him for a long moment. You're serious about this? Dead serious, John said. I've spent too long running from things. If I can help you take down the people who did this, maybe it'll mean something. Her expression shifted, a mix of surprise and something deeper, gratitude. Maybe, though she didn't say it aloud. Instead, she nodded. Hours later, the two of them stood in the cockpit, a hollow map of syndicate-controlled space hovering between them. Kyra tapped a glowing sector, her voice steady. This is their hub, a station orbiting Euroni's V. They run everything from there, smuggling, trafficking weapons. If we hit them here, it'll cripple their operations. John crossed his arms, studying the map. You make it sound simple. It's not, Kyra admitted. The station is heavily fortified, and they'll expect an attack after what happened. Then we need an edge, John said. Something they won't see coming. Kyra tilted her head, a faint smirk forming. You're the pilot. Any brilliant ideas? John thought for a moment, his fingers tapping the console. If we can disable their comms, they won't be able to call for reinforcements. That gives us time to do some damage. And how do you plan to disable their comms? Kyra asked. John grinned. By getting close enough to fry their systems with an EMP, it'll knock out everything within range. Kyra raised an eyebrow. Including our own ship? John's grin faltered. Well, yeah, but only temporarily. I can reboot the systems manually. It's risky, but it's our best shot. Kyra nodded, her smirk returning. Risky. I like it. The approach to the Syndicate station was tense. The freighter's engines hummed softly as John guided the ship toward the massive structure. It loomed against the backdrop of stars, its skeletal framework bristling with turrets and fighter bays. Comms are encrypted, John said, his fingers flying over the controls. But I can fake a supply ship ID long enough to get close. Kyra stood beside him, her arms crossed. And when they figure out we're not delivering cargo, then we improvise, John replied, flashing her a grin. Kyra shook her head, though there was a glimmer of amusement in her eyes. You're impossible. The station grew larger on the view screen, its silhouette casting jagged shadows across the freighter. John's hands tightened on the controls as he maneuvered closer, keeping their trajectory steady. The comm crackled. Unidentified vessel. State your purpose. John toggled the mic. Supply run from Euroni's Bazaar. Routine delivery. There was a pause, and Kyra tensed, her fingers brushing the handle of the rifle slung over her shoulder. Proceed to docking bay 7, the voice finally said. John exhaled, his shoulders relaxing slightly. That was easy. Too easy, Kyra muttered. The freighter settled into the docking bay with a low hiss as its landing gear engaged. John shut down the engines, his pulse quickening. He glanced at Kyra. EMP's ready, he said. Once it goes off, we'll have about 5 minutes before their backup systems kick in. Kyra nodded. Plenty of time. John hesitated, his eyes searching hers. You sure about this? She smirked, the confidence in her expression unshaken. Are you? John laughed softly. Not even a little. The moment the EMP detonated, the station's lights flickered and died, plunging the docking bay into darkness. Kyra moved first, her steps silent as she led the way toward the control center. The halls were eerily quiet, the usual hum of machinery replaced by the faint echo of their footsteps. Kyra's movements were precise, every turn calculated. John followed close behind, his heart pounding. When they reached the control room, 2 guards stood at the entrance, their weapons raised. Before John could react, Kyra surged forward, dispatching them with brutal efficiency. She pushed open the door, revealing rows of consoles and monitors, all offline. Kyra scanned the room, her gaze landing on a central terminal. "This is it," she said, moving to the console. "Give me a minute." John kept watch, his eyes darting to the shadows. "Whatever you're doing, do it fast." Kyra's fingers flew over the terminal, her expression focused. "I'm downloading their files. This will tell us where their main operations are and who's in charge." The sound of approaching footsteps echoed down the hall. John turned, his grip tightening on his pistol. "We got company." Kyra didn't look up. "Buy me 30 seconds." John stepped into the hallway, his heart hammering as he fired at the first figures to round the corner. The syndicate guards scattered, their shots ricocheting off the walls. 10 seconds, Kyra called out. John ducked behind a crate, returning fire as the guards pressed forward. "Make it 5. "Done," Kyra said, pulling a data chip from the terminal. She grabbed John's arm, pulling him toward a maintenance hatch. "This way," she said, her voice steady despite the chaos. They slipped into the narrow passage, the sound of shouts and gunfire fading behind them. When they finally emerged back at the freighter, John felt his chest unclench. Kyra turned to him, holding up the data chip. "We have what we need." John grinned, his adrenaline still pumping. "And we're still alive? I call that a win." Kyra smirked, her golden eyes gleaming. "Let's not make it a habit." As the freighter lifted off, leaving the station behind, John couldn't help but feel a strange sense of satisfaction. For the first time in years, he wasn't just running, he was fighting for something that mattered. And he wasn't doing it alone. The freighter streaked through the darkness of hyperspace, its engines humming a steady tune. John stood at the console, his fingers brushing over the edges of the data chip Kyra had retrieved from the Syndicate's terminal. The tiny piece of tech was deceptively small, holding within it the names, locations, and operations of a criminal empire. Across the cockpit, Kyra leaned against the wall, her golden eyes fixed on the stars stretching endlessly outside the viewport. She hadn't said much since they'd escaped the station, but her silence wasn't cold. It was contemplative, as though she were trying to shape the path ahead. John finally broke the silence. "This chip could dismantle everything they've built." Kyra turned her head, her expression unreadable. "It's a start." John set the chip down on the console and faced her fully. "What's the rest of the plan? You've got the names, the locations. What now?" Kyra exhaled softly, crossing her arms. "We use it. Expose their networks. Turn their allies against them. Dismantle them piece by piece." "That's a lot to take on for 2 people in a freighter held together with duct tape," John said, though his tone was more curious than doubtful. Kyra allowed a faint smirk to form. "You're not afraid, are you?" John chuckled. "I'm terrified, but I've come this far. Might as well see it through." For a moment, her gaze softened. She stepped closer, her movements unhurried but purposeful. "Why?" she asked, her voice quieter now. "Why what? Why are you helping me?" John hesitated, running a hand through his hair as he searched for the right words. At first, it was guilt. I didn't want to walk away from someone who didn't deserve what they were going through. But now it's more than that. Kyra tilted her head, her sharp gaze locking on his. "What is it then?" John's voice grew steadier as he spoke. "Because I believe in you. You're not just fighting for revenge. You're fighting for freedom, not just for yourself, but for anyone who's been caught in their web. That matters. And if I can help you succeed, maybe my life means something too." Kyra's expression flickered with something John hadn't seen before. Vulnerability, subtle but undeniable. She stepped even closer, now standing just a foot away. "You think I can win this?" "I know you can," John said firmly. Kyra studied him for a long moment, her walls lowering in a way that made the air between them feel charged. "You've risked everything for me," she said softly, "when you didn't have to." "Maybe I didn't," John replied, his voice just above a whisper. "But I wanted to." The distance between them disappeared as she leaned in, her hand resting lightly on his chest. John's breath caught, but he didn't move. Her touch was surprisingly gentle, her strength tempered by an unfamiliar softness. "John," she said, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "Yeah? You're not who I thought you were," she said, a faint smile touching her lips. He raised an eyebrow. That a good thing? Her smile widened slightly, though her golden eyes glimmered with seriousness. It is. For the first time in years, John felt like he wasn't drifting. Whatever this was, this partnership, this bond, it felt real, solid, and worth fighting for. The next day, they stood together in the cargo hold, the hollow map projected between them. Kyra pointed to a distant sector. This is where their central network operates. If we take it out, the Syndicate loses its grip on half the galaxy. John nodded, studying the map. And the other half? We'll deal with that when the time comes, Kyra said, her voice firm but not unkind. John glanced at her. So, you're saying this isn't going to be easy? Kyra smirked. Would you stick around if it were? He laughed. Probably not. They shared a brief but meaningful silence, the weight of what lay ahead tempered by the connection they had forged. Whatever happens, John said, his tone serious, we see it through together. Kyra's gaze softened, and she nodded. Together. As the freighter exited hyperspace, the sprawling Syndicate hub came into view, a massive structure bristling with defenses. The sight would have been enough to make anyone turn back, but not them. Kyra adjusted the straps of her armor, her expression steely. This is just the beginning. John powered up the freighter's engines, his grin wry but determined. Then let's make it count. The freighter surged forward, diving into the fray. Together, they would face whatever came next, not as captor and cargo, or even as allies, but as equals bound by trust and a shared purpose. And for the first time in their lives, they weren't running. They were fighting for something bigger than themselves. The Syndicate's reign began to crumble. Rumors of their secrets leaking into the galaxy spread like wildfire. Systems once under their thumb rose in rebellion. And Kyra's name became a whispered legend, a warrior who had defied her creators and lit a spark of resistance. John and Kyra stood at the forefront of it all, their bond unshakable, their purpose clear. As they prepared for their next mission, John turned to her with a grin. You ever think about what comes after all this? Kyra raised an eyebrow. You planning a retirement already? Maybe, he said, but only if you're there too. Kyra smirked, but her eyes held something warmer. We'll see. Together, they stepped into the unknown, ready to face whatever the stars had in store.